Genesis chapter 7, verse 1, The Lord then said to Noah, Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Verse 2, Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate. Verse 3. And also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. Verse 4, 7 days from now I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. Verse 5, And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Verse 6, Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came on the earth. Verse 7, And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Verse 8, Pairs of clean and unclean animals, of birds and of all creatures that move along the ground. Verse 9. Male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark, as God had commanded Noah. Verse 10, And after the 7 days the floodwaters came on the earth. Verse 11, In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, on that day all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Verse 12, And rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Verse 13, On that very day Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth, together with his wife and the wives of his 3 sons, entered the ark. Verse 14, They had with them every wild animal according to its kind, all livestock according to their kinds, every creature that moves along the ground according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, everything with wings. Verse 15, Pairs of all creatures that have the breath of life in them came to Noah and entered the ark. Verse 16, The animals going in were male and female of every living thing, as God had commanded Noah. Then the Lord shut him in. Verse 17, For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased they lifted the ark high above the earth. Verse 18, The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. Verse 19, They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. Verse 20, The waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 15 cubits. Verse 21, Every living thing that moved on land perished, birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Verse 22, Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Verse 23, Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out, people and animals and the creatures that move along the ground and the birds were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. Verse 24, The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. Commentary. Genesis chapter 7, God destroys the world with a flood. Letter A. The final preparations of Noah for the flood. Number 1. God invites Noah into the ark. Verse 1 Then the Lord said to Noah, Come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Letter A. Come into the ark. The idea is that God was in the ark and would be with Noah in the ark, so he called Noah to come into the ark with him. Notice that the Lord did not say to Noah, Go into the ark, but come, plainly implying that God was himself in the ark, waiting to receive Noah and his family into the big ship that was to be their place of refuge while all the other people on the face of the earth were drowned. Spurgeon. Letter B. I have seen that you are righteous. Noah spent the years before the flood in active obedience. He not only believed God would send the flood, he obeyed what God told him to do in preparation for it. Number 2. Noah gathers all the animals and his family. Verses 2 to 9, you shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal, a male and his female, 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female, also 7 each of birds of the air, male and female, to keep the species alive on the face of all the earth. For after 7 more days I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made. And Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters were on the earth. So Noah, with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives, went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Of clean animals, of animals that are unclean, of birds, and of everything that creeps on the earth, 2 by 2 they went into the ark to Noah, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. Letter A. You shall take with you. Some wonder how the animals came to Noah or how Noah got them. In Genesis chapter 6 verse 20 God said the animals would come to Noah by migration. In some animals, God has created a migratory instinct, which can operate in an amazing manner. It is no difficulty for him to miraculously place an urge to migrate to the ark in each pair of animals he planned to be preserved in the ark. This largest and most complete menagerie that was ever gathered together was not collected by human skill. Divine power alone could have accomplished such a task as that. Spurgeon, letter B. 2 by 2 they went into the ark to Noah. God never has a problem getting the animals to do what he wants. Only man is more stupid than the animals. The ox knows its owner and the donkey its master's crib, but Israel does not know. My people do not consider. Isaiah chapter 1 verse 3. Number 3. God brings the waters upon the earth. Verses 10 to 12 And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Letter A. After 7 days that the waters of the flood were on the earth, Noah, the animals, and his family had to wait in the ark 7 days for the rain to come. They had never seen rain up to this time. This was a real test of faith, to wait a week after more than 100 years of preparation. Letter B. The windows of heaven were opened. This is when the heavens containing the great waters that were above the firmament, Genesis chapter 1 verse 7, opened up. These waters formed the huge so-called blanket of water in the upper part of the earth's atmosphere since creation. Letter C. The fountains of the great deep that were broken up, waters came up from under the earth also, no doubt accompanied by great geological catastrophe. Letter D. 40 days and 40 nights. The number 40 becomes associated with testing and purification, especially before entering into something new and significant. This is seen in Moses' time on Mount Sinai, Exodus chapter 24 verse 18, Deuteronomy chapter 9 verse 25. The spies' trip to Canaan, Numbers chapter 13 verse 25. Israel's time in the wilderness, Numbers chapter 14 verse 33, 32 to 13. Elijah's miraculous journey to Sinai, 1 Kings chapter 19 verse 8. Jesus' temptation in the wilderness, Mark chapter 1 verse 13. Number 4. All enter the ark and the door is shut. Verses 13 to 16. On the very same day Noah and Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons with them, entered the ark, they and every beast after its kind, all cattle after their kind, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, every bird of every sort. And they went into the ark to Noah, 2 by 2, of all flesh in which is the breath of life. So those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. Letter A. Went in as God had commanded him. This summary statement describes how everything was fulfilled exactly as the Lord had spoken. all things were ready for the flood God would bring upon the earth. Letter B. And the Lord shut him in. Noah did not have to shut the door on anyone's salvation, God did it. After the same pattern, it is never our job to disqualify people from salvation. If the door is to be shut, let God shut the door. God kept the door open until the last possible minute, but there came a time when the door had to shut. When the door is open, it is open, but when it is shut, it is shut. Jesus is he who opens and no one shuts, and shuts and no one opens. Revelation chapter 3 verse 7. The ark was salvation for Noah, but condemnation for the world. There were no second chances for those left out. Yea, when the 120 years were over, and God's Spirit would no longer strive with men, there stood the great ark with its vast door wide open, and still Noah continued to preach and to declare that all who would pass within that open portal into the ark of safety should be preserved from the coming destruction. Outside that door death would reign universally, but all would be peace within. Spurgeon. Letter B. Noah in the ark during the flood. Number 1. The flood described. Verses 17 to 23. Now the flood was on the earth 40 days. The waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth, and the ark moved about on the surface of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and the mountains were covered. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds and cattle and beasts and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man. All in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, all that was on the dry land, died. So he destroyed all living things which were on the face of the ground, both man and cattle, creeping thing and bird of the air. They were destroyed from the earth. Only Noah and those who were with him in the ark remained alive. Letter A. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth. The description of the flood in this passage is so complete and specific that it is impossible to reconcile a local flood with the biblical record. Despite the claims of some, this is the description of a global deluge. If this were not a global flood, then the ark itself would be unnecessary. If this were only a local flood, then God's promise to never again bring such a flood is false. If this were only a local flood, the Bible is wrong when it traces all of humanity back to Noah's sons and other passages that speak of a universal flood, such as Psalm chapter 104 verses 5 to 9 and 2 Peter chapter 3 verses 5 to 6. Literally, hundreds of people groups have their own accounts and legends of the flood. One of the most remarkable is the Babylonian account, which is similar to the Genesis account in many ways and is clearly drawn from it. Since all mankind came from Noah's sons, all mankind remembers the flood. Boyce specifically cites the legends of the Samo-Kubo tribe of New Guinea, the Athapascan Indians of America, the Papago Indians of Arizona, Brazilian tribes, Peruvian Indians, African Hottentots, natives of Greenland, native Hawaiian Islanders, Hindus, Chinese, Egyptians, Greeks, Persians, Australian natives, the Welsh, Celts, Druids, Siberians, and Lithuanians. Of the more than 200 cultures that have their own account of the flood, the following aspects of the story are common. 88% describe a favored family. 70% attribute survival to a boat. 95% say the sole cause of the catastrophe is a flood. 66% say that the disaster is due to man's wickedness. 67% record that animals are also saved. 57% describe that the survivors end up on a mountain. Many of the accounts also specifically mention birds being sent out, a rainbow, and 8 persons being saved. Letter B. And the mountains were covered. This took a lot of water, but there is plenty of water on the earth today to do this, but because of the topography of the earth, the water is collected into oceans. If the earth were a perfect sphere, the oceans would cover the land to a depth of 2.5 to 3 miles. Before the cataclysmic flood, the earth may have been much nearer to a perfect sphere. If Moses had meant to describe a partial deluge upon only a small part of the earth, he used very misleading language, but if he meant to teach was that the deluge was universal, he used the very word which we might have expected that he would use. Spurgeon, letter C, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the spirit of life, all that was on the dry land, died. In the Scopes monkey trial, in America, 1925, Clarence Darrow humiliated William Jennings Bryan by asking him if he believed every word in the Bible. When Bryan said he did, Darrow asked him how the fish drowned in the flood. Bryan didn't know the answer, gave a long and confused speech, and died the next day. If only he would have known the Bible better, he would have known it says this about the breath of the Spirit of life. The fish did not die in the flood, only animals with the breath of life in them died, the animals on dry land. God did just as he said. Virtually all of Noah's contemporaries did not believe God would do just as he said. Though it took 120 years, God demonstrated that he keeps his promises and is totally faithful. 2. The flood lasted 150 days without receding. Verse 24 And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Letter A. 150 days. Some suggest that God put some or many of these animals into a period of hibernation for this period, meaning that less food, space, and supervision was needed. God provides many animals today with an amazing instinct for hibernation. It would be no difficulty for him to miraculously impart a unique instinct for these particular animals. Letter B. 150 days, safe in the ark, God sustained Noah and his family through this time of catastrophe and judgment. Shut in and sheltered from the storm and flood, they were safe. Noah underwent burial to all the old things that he might come out into a new world, and even so we die in Christ that we may live with him. Spurgeon,